In October 2006, the Ulster Museum closed its doors to allow a major refurbishment to take place. For the duration of this work, all the museum's contents were removed and hidden in a secret location, in darkness. And in this darkness lay one much-loved exhibit whose face was to be revealed for the first time in thousands of years. That of the mummy whose name was Takabuti. There were so many questions. Where did she come from? What was life like for her? How did she come to be in Belfast? And most intriguingly, what did she look like? '21st century science and technology were to play a huge part in unravelling these mysteries. Universities from England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland would come together to share their resources and their research facilities. A team of experts would convene at Belfast Castle to attempt to piece together the jigsaw of facts and myths surrounding the mummy.
This was one of the most spectacular mummies we've ever come together to work on.
What we found as a team was that this person, Takabuti, became real to us, even though she was 2,500 years old.
We have known her for so many years and know a certain amount about her, but there's the prospect of knowing so very much more.
The search for answers would take the experts on a journey to Takabuti's Egyptian homeland, where they would walk in her steps across the deserts near Cairo and Luxor.
I say that this person looks to me alive.
The evidence we have about her manicure and her hairstyle shows us that she was indeed somebody of very high status.
The story of Takabuti was also to reveal an Irish connection to the cracking of cryptic coded hieroglyphs and discover a man written out of the history books, driven to despair by his contemporaries and their conspiracies.
The word genius is often bandied about, but Hincks was a true genius. He was a code breaker.
And now, for the first time since the Egyptian 25th dynasty, people will be able to see how Takabuti would have looked in life. Today's modern Egypt is a visually remarkable country. The day-to-day bustle of its busy cities still hold references to past centuries, but with all the elements of modern living merged with the past. It's a country still drenched in its history, a time filled with spectacular temples and tombs with iconic sites and landscapes famous across the globe. These were to be the backdrop to the story of Takabuti. It's known the mummy was brought to Belfast by boat from Egypt in 1834 by a wealthy young man from Hollywood, County Down, called Thomas Gregg. Gregg had bought Takabuti at a mummy market in Thebes, now Luxor, a place where the rich could buy stolen goods and plundered remains. These would be brought home to impress their friends at dinner parties and to make a mark for themselves amongst their peers. Thomas Gregg was not one of these people. Instead, he donated the mummified remains to the Belfast Natural History and Philosophical Society. The unwrapping and deciphering of Takabuti's hieroglyphs on the 27th of January 1835 was to cause a sensation. Her resting place for the next 150 years, however, was to be at the Ulster Museum. When the museum closed its doors for refurbishment, Takabuti was packed away. The closure offered a window of opportunity for a small group to seek permission to have access to her remains. Winifred Glover has been Takabuti's curator for over 30 years. She was initially reluctant to offer up her prized exhibit for examination.
I've always thought of her as a person and as a personal friend almost. And you know, if you have a great friend, you wonder what other people are going to say to her or do to her or whatever. So I was slightly wondering what it was going to turn out like.
Winifred Glover decided to join the project so she could be with her precious Takabuti and be part of the team who would reveal her face. A team of experts were brought together, all with a personal interest in the mummy. Their skills and specialist knowledge would be crucial in finding out and piecing together the medical and scientific elements required for this project.
The things we can do, it depends how much you would like us to do.
You might be able to sort of see that some of her bones are not entirely fused.
They were really starting to look at the scientific value.
It actually sweeps a laser over the surface.
This was one of the most spectacular mummies we've ever come together to work on. Fantastic in terms of the state of preservation, the amount of hair still there, the nails, the teeth, everything. So I think all the team were really excited to be able to see this and to think about the possibilities of all the multidisciplinary studies we'll be able to do on the mummy.
I was very excited because Takabuti was a mummy very well known to me from my childhood, so it was a real thrill to be involved in a project which would help us learn more about her.
And to get the chance to work on an Egyptian mummy was just beyond belief, actually. When I got the call, it was fantastic. It was a really exciting time.
This incredible interest in this one mummy in Belfast has never really abated. Whole generations come to see her, and grandparents bring grandchildren to see her. So she's been a part of really Belfast life since she came. Mm-hmm. She was collected in Thebes in Egypt, was one of the great important towns. And they had a big cemetery on the western side of the city, and this is apparently where her mummy came from, and it caused an absolute sensation. And it wasn't until the beginning of 1835 that she was unwrapped. Now, the unwrapping was done by the Reverend Edward Hincks, and he was really a genius. For his time, he was a genius.
Edward Hincks was born in Cork in 1792, the eldest son of a brilliant family. He was to become one of the foremost Egyptologists of his day and be responsible for the deciphering of the hieroglyphs on the sarcophagus of Takabuti. He would create a template that would be key to unlocking ancient Egyptian codes.
Because there was no TV or video in those days, it was almost like an alien autopsy today would cause the same excitement. It was an age of exploration and discovery, and you can see the excitement and the enthusiasm that they brought to the whole thing. They really enjoyed this sort of thing.
Hincks had a brilliant mind and was able to determine that the horizontal inscriptions offered up the names and titles of Takabuti and her parents, while the vertical inscriptions were the speeches of the gods depicted alongside.
Her name was Takabuti. Hincks said she was the mistress of a great house, that she was a married woman, that her father was called Nespari and her mother was called Tasanirit.
In Takabuti's time, around 650 BC, Ireland was in the Iron Age, but in Egypt, their civilization was much more advanced, with already long-standing pyramids and temples. The names of Takabuti's parents would be the starting point for the experts to begin putting the locations and timelines into place and to explore deeper into her story.
Well, I would be very interested, as I think people from Ireland always are, is who are you and who's your father and who's your mother? And we know her father's name, Nespari, we know her mother's name, Tasanirit, and as he was a priest of Amun, it should be possible, hopefully, to perhaps find out more about her family, because it will give you more of a picture of the life of a well-to-do Egyptian lady.
The next stage would be to bring in medical science.
First of all, the mummy goes to be x-rayed. You get all the information from the skeleton about the age of the person, if there's any disease and so on. From that, we can find out about the mummification process. We can look at her diet. So it's a detective story, really.
If the revealed face of Takabuti was to be the end result of this journey, Then the experts needed to see a more detailed image of the landscape of her features as they are today. It was decided that Queen's University in Belfast would carry out non-intrusive three-dimensional laser scanning.
I remember vividly getting the phone call inviting me to be a part of this project. I was extremely excited. I usually scan rocks and buildings and people probably conceive as fairly mundane things.
A single laser beam would continuously sweep across the face, each time building up a layer of information, starting to create an exact profile of a woman who died thousands of years before.
Its proper name is a three-dimensional non-contact digitizer. It's a camera with a laser built into it, as well as taking a traditional photograph. It sweeps a laser beam over the surface in front of it and captures that in full 3D.
360-degree scans were meshed together, the gathered data used to slowly build up a three-dimensional model. It would allow the experts the first sight of Takabuti's face as a movable image and to imagine for the first time how she might have looked in life. It was to be the first of many steps that science would take in recreating Takabuti's features. Imagine if we could travel back in time to Takabuti's day. What words would we use to describe to her her legacy and the world in which her remains were now kept? Just as Takabuti arrived in Ireland in 1834, she was to travel once more by boat to England, to Manchester, where she was to be scanned in the next stage of the search for answers.
Well, I think the most exciting part, the next part of the process is that, we who have known her for so many years and know a certain amount about her, but there's the prospect of knowing so very much more. And the more about you know about a person, the more interesting they become. And I think this is one of the great things about Takabuti.
The mummy was taken to the K&H Centre at Manchester University, where its research into biomedical Egyptology has gained worldwide recognition. Here, under strict medical supervision, the team hoped to be able to scan Takabuti and to examine her for any cause of death, and, for the first time, carefully place a camera inside the body to see what was inside.
We had this wonderful opportunity to examine one mummy in totality and to get information about one individual person from ancient Egypt. In Manchester we have facilities that range from radiology, histology, through to various analytical techniques, and so we can bring all these to the examination of the mummy.
Rosalie David and her Egyptian mummy team, they are the world's leaders in this type of research. Anything else wouldn't have given Takabuti the full treatment that she deserved.
This is such a well-preserved mummy, it's quite amazing. You can see the skin colour there, which is probably the result of the treatment with resin. The hair, of course, is incredibly well preserved, which is very unusual because usually they shave the heads of the individuals at death. So to have this amount of hair is quite amazing. The skin, of course, is incredibly well preserved. I mean, on the hands and the foot and the face. I think the mummy dates to the 25th dynasty, they think, from the coffin, which is about 660 BC. So she was living at a time when Egypt had been invaded from the south by the Nubians and then from the north by the Assyrians. So she lived in very interesting political times.
It was like I was back 30 years ago when I was a little girl visiting the Ulster Museum, specifically to see Takabuti. And now I feel very privileged as a scientist, to be part of this research team, and we can conduct a range of non-destructive scientific techniques to learn more about her.
They obviously lavished a lot of care on this lady during her mummification. The quality shows that she, in life, And again, that's what we're all trying to find out, what was she like in life as well as her death. It gives us a window into what her life and her last days were like.
And we look forward very much to the next stage tomorrow, which will be the X-raying of the mummy, where we'll really see what there is inside the mummy and the possibility, of course, of endoscoping the tissue samples. These can then be taken on for a whole range of different techniques to build up a real picture of what this lady's life was like. And I think everybody has gone away from today with really very exciting ideas about tomorrow.
The following day saw Takabuti taken to the Manchester Royal Infirmary for analysis. The team at the infirmary treated her with the same care and dignity as a living person. Firstly, she was to undergo a full-body CT scan, which would allow the team to see exactly what lay beneath the ancient wrappings over her body.
Just basically a plain X-ray, just an AP from top to toe.
A CT or computerised tomography scan is a special kind of X-ray machine. Instead of beaming a single X-ray through the body, several are sent through simultaneously from different angles. A computer can then work out the density of tissues and can be used to make a two-dimensional cross-section of the body.
It's always a revelation when you see the CAT scans for the first time, because you're actually looking inside the mummy at all the evidence that is really being revealed for the first time. So you can see whether the skeleton is complete, you can see if the organs are present, and it's really a window into the mummy.
That's a bit more spectacular.
Yes.
It looks in good condition, actually. So here's the fabric.
Beginning to get the bandages.
The initial basic findings were enough to excite the team. For the first time, they were presented with hard scientific and medical facts. Every minute detail could throw up something more about Takabuti.
Now here's a package between
the...
Among the expected internal images was something which caught the expert's eye. A mysterious package.
It was extremely intriguing to see the package up on the top left of her chest, and this has now caused quite a lot of debate. What was this package?
The Egyptian god Osiris was the ruler of the underworld and god of regeneration. It was believed that he was the one who would judge the heart and soul of Takabuti and offer hope of survival in the afterlife. The mummification process, by today's medical standards, was a gory event. The internal organs were removed and preserved in jars. The brain was removed by inserting a metal rod up the nose of the deceased. Surprisingly, Takabuti's brain appeared to remain in place. But mysteriously, the all-important heart, Takabuti's ticket to the afterlife, appeared to be missing.
Normally the heart would be left behind.
Well, I have some images lower down, but I could not identify the heart.
Yes.
We didn't see evidence of disease. It's a fairly young person, as you know, and a female, and we can tell the sex from the shape of the pelvis.
Well, I think it's very interesting as a good example of the best kind of mummification that would have been available at this time. So it bears out everything else we know about her as being somebody of status who would have had a relatively top-grade mummification.
While the CT medical information was collated, the scans of Takabuti were pieced together to form an incredibly detailed framework of her face. These pictures were to be used as a template to create a 3D model which would allow a skeletal assessment to take place. The scanned information was sent to Dundee University, a world leader in forensic facial reconstruction. It was to be a case for Dr. Caroline Wilkinson, no stranger to the challenges of recreating the faces of the long dead.
We're involved in a lot of forensic investigations with the police for identifying bodies, and we've done a lot of archaeological investigation work. So the work that we've done in the past has been on bog bodies and other ancient Egyptians. So this work on Takabuti was a natural progression from that. The first information that we received was the 3D model of the skull from the CT data. And initially we assessed the skull to find out how much information it's going to give us about the face and the features. And in this case we got very good information because the skull was in very good condition, there were no missing parts. So this gives us all the information we need to produce a facial reconstruction. The first stage of the reconstruction process is to apply tissue depth pegs to the surface of the skull, and they represent the average tissue depth at those anatomical points. That helps us to know how much soft tissue to add over and above the muscle structure. So we know that everybody has the same muscles on their face, they have the same origins and the same attachment points. But because each skull is different, those muscles will be in a slightly different position. So we have a database, like a library of pre-modelled muscles that we can import for each skull and then distort them to fit the new skull. So we put on all the muscles of the face that are important in terms of face shape, from those large muscles of mastication that we use for chewing and talking, down to the smaller muscles of facial expression. There are features to Takabuti's skull that give ambiguous determination of ancestry. She's got a very long distance from the front of the skull to the back of the skull, which is something that is quite common in ancient Egyptians. But she also has what's called an occipital bulge, which is a bulge on the back of the skull that's more common in white European ancestry.
Was this to imply that Takabuti was not of Egyptian origins? This was not going to be an open and shut investigation.
Right, well, I think what I'll do first of all is use the video probe just to do a general scan around on the head here.
Yeah.
Back in Manchester, the team were about to embark on an incredible journey into the body of Takabuti. The endoscope would allow access to the mummy without damage and with the utmost respect for the body. To get any form of tissue and hair samples would be crucial to discovering more about Takabuti. It was decided that the best point of entry was an area in her ribs which had already been opened in 1835.
If we can get there again with the forceps on, we'll see if we can harvest a little bit of that.
Very timidly, a small set of forceps were fed through and sent on a remarkable journey to collect samples from within the body.
That bit of tissue. Some small fragments.
A small sample of the mummy's hair was also collected. This would be an invaluable source of information for the carbon dating process back in Belfast. The hair, internal tissue and material samples were immediately analysed by Rosalie's team of experts. While some of the samples delivered amazing results, other samples were to be a great disappointment to the team.
What we see here is a microscopic preparation of the material taken from Takabuti. The commonest thing we see are plant fragments, or in fact wood sawdust, that was used to pack Takabuti following mummification. Here we see a Tyrophagus mite. These mites are commonly found in stored cereal products. In this case, the mites would have used the packing as a food source. As a consequence of eating the packing, they produced the excreta or feces of the mite, which we see here as these orange spheres. The mummy was stuffed using sawdust. That would have been a high-level mummification process in the time. Subsequent to that, we have the problem with house mites, or these Tyrophagus mites that have infested the mummy. That presents a major conservation problem for us.
The mummified remains had been infested and destroyed by mites and parasites, making it impossible to get clear results from the tissue samples. Without any clear and clean samples, histology tests could throw little light onto Takabuti in life and death. It was a devastating blow for the team. The hair of Takabuti was the only pure source of information the team had to work with. If this too was polluted or badly damaged, there was very little hope for definite results.
The first interesting point is the tips of the hair. This here is a modern cut end. As you can see, it's very straight and blunt. But Takabuti's natural ends of the hair were very similar. Now this indicates that her hair had been cut either just before she died or after she had died. Under the light microscopy, there did appear what may have been a nit or louse egg. So if she did have nits or lice, they would have been from ancient Egypt. And we know that nits were a bother to people then as they are now, because we have remedies in papyri to treat nits.
What can we say about the colour? Because on the mummy it looks as if it's blonde, almost a red-headed blonde.
Yes, well, fortunately, when Takabuti was unwrapped, a lock of her hair was kept separate. So this hair actually looks a darker brown or auburn colour. She wouldn't have been blonde or red.
That's a shame, really. But what could you say about her ethnic background? Is there anything you can say about that from the hair?
Yes, we cross-section the hair, and there are 3 types. There's Mongoloid, Caucasian and Negroid. This is all determined by the shape the cross-section makes. And Takabuti was more Caucasian.
Right, yes. Because we speculated on whether she was somebody from outside Egypt.
Her hair is very unusual.
Yes.
As we sort of look at it even closer, we can tell that her hair has been artificially curled. The ancient Egyptians had curling tongs similar to what we have today. They would be made of metal and heated to form a curl. Now, what is interesting, you can see a very fine sort of coating over the hair. Now, this, in effect, is ancient Egyptian hair gel. It's an oil or animal fat substance that has been put just on the roots of the hair, and we think this would have held the curl in place. So in effect it looks like someone's styled her hair and left it as it would have been when she died. It is important, I think, because your hair is so much of your identity, and Takabuti's identity, really, because we want to know what she looked like, what she would have been like in life, and her hairstyle would have played a big part.
The incredibly high standard of hair samples offered up a huge amount of information. Was Takabuti from outside Egypt? Was her hair of such importance to her that someone cut it on the day that she died? For an Egyptian woman to reject the traditional shaved head option and thus to leave herself vulnerable to infestation by head lice, her hair must have been a huge part of who she was. The CT scans and muscle reconstruction files were sent from Dundee to Cardiff University to be merged together so that a solid head could be projected into a vat of liquid resin to slowly build up an exact head. The process would see thousands of layers of skin being built up in latex one by one in exact accordance to the measurements given up by the previous scans and skeletal information.
These machines take three-dimensional computer geometry and slice it down into many thousands of layers, in this case 1,205 layers, and rebuild each layer at a single time. Once one layer is finished, it recoats that layer and builds the next one. So it's gradually building on top of the previous.
It would literally rebuild the mummy's face. This was the recreation of the face of Takabuti. The story of Takabuti was not just about one woman. It was to offer up the story of a man whose brilliant mind was to break the code of Egyptian hieroglyphs. A man who was to live his life in deep frustration and depression. A man who was to challenge both the church and the British establishment. Takabuti was one of the greatest loves of his life, but she would also play a part in his eventual downfall.
It was here in 1825 that Dr. Edward Hincks arrived in the beautiful country church in Killalay. Hincks was to spend 40 years ministering to the congregation here. During that time, he became increasingly unhappy and despondent about his lack of advancement in the church. But despite this, he ended up as one of the great pioneers in Egyptology and Assyriology.
While Hincks never visited Egypt, his mind was able to decipher the cryptic symbols on her sarcophagus.
The word genius is often bandied about, but Hincks was a true genius. He was a code breaker. He had the sort of hardwired mind that could look at a jumble of data and make sense of it. Very few people can do that, but there is a price to pay. Hincks was introduced to codes and to decipherment at an early age. His father was a professor of Hebrew in Belfast, and Hincks was, in his family life, exposed to these things from an early age. He also took to papyri, which they had a great collection of in Trinity College. He took to reading them much more easily than the professor, Charles Wall, in Trinity, and this didn't go down well with Charles Wall either because his student was showing him up.
Edward Hincks had a personality that could ruffle feathers and antagonise those around him.
Hincks rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. He started that at university, having come from an exceptional family. His brothers all did extremely well, either in the church or in politics. But when he got a scholarship to Trinity, he wrote a poem in favour of Napoleon Bonaparte, which was not a good idea at the time. And he ended up shifted from Trinity College up to Armagh and then on to Killalay. It is incredible to think that Hincks, for 40 years, carried out the vast majority of his work in this house. The standard of that work was world class, better than many university departments of Egyptology and Assyriology. And it was from this house in 1835 that he was called to Belfast to supervise the unwrapping of the mummy Takabuti and the decipherment of her hieroglyphs. And it was perhaps characteristic of the man and his personality that he kept them waiting 5 days before turning up.
The unwrapping took place in the upper room of the Belfast Natural History and Philosophical Society, now the Old Museum Arts Centre. The Reverend Edward Hincks astounded his peers with his knowledge and insight of the hieroglyphics on the coffin. Hincks's personality and demeanour, however, was to cause resentment and eventual exclusion from the circles he so wished to impress. He was never to gain the accolade he deserved for his work in hieroglyphic decipherments.
He recognised this himself in a letter to Robert Peel, the Prime Minister, where he begged for a position in Egyptology and was eventually turned down. And indeed, he took this so seriously that when his brother Francis, who was Prime Minister of Canada, put in a word for him with the British government, Hincks became so annoyed that he didn't speak to him for some time.
Frustrated and angered at being overlooked in so many areas of his professional life, Hincks was to be kept in Killalay for the remainder of his days.
In Dr. Hincks's final years, his personal health declined, as did that of his wife. Sadly, Dr. Hincks died in 1866, still at the top of his field, but in his own mind, unfulfilled and disillusioned. I get a great feeling of sadness that he didn't achieve all that he could have achieved. Unfortunately, it was his personality, the flip side of which was quite dark, which prevented him from reaching even greater heights.
For the full story of Takabuti's life, the team had to travel to the places she once lived, amongst the tombs and temples of ancient Egypt. What secrets would these deserts and landmarks offer up? The deserts of Saqqara were to be the perfect location to get a true understanding of the impact and ingenuity of the ancient Egyptians. Saqqara was a burial ground for over 3,500 years. A meeting was set up with Dr. Zaki Hawass, the head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. To help them understand more about Takabuti, Dr. Hawass opened up the tomb of the oldest mummy ever found, which is closed to the public.
We were very privileged to have the opportunity to be escorted round that tomb by Dr. Zaki Hawass, who is the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt. And this was a real insight into the relationship with mummification.
In my opinion, this is the most beautiful tomb ever found at Saqqara. Because this tomb is a family tomb, belonging to a person called Nefer, and it was his family.
The walls of the tomb were painted with ancient decorations portraying the day-to-day life of Nefer and his family, along with his hopes for what lay ahead in death.
And of course, we start with the regular scene of Nefer in front of his wife, with an offering table, having 1,000 bread, 1,000 beer, 1,000 of everything. And other scenes of slaughtering ducks and animals and hunting, all the daily life scenes that the deceased would like to have in the afterlife. There is no name found for this mummy, but scholars who excavated this tomb, they believe the name was Watai, and he's one of the members of the family of Nefer. Then it's going to be very important for you to look at the oldest private mummy ever found in Egypt that dated back to 4,300 years ago. But really what's amazing about this mummy, that the feet and all his body was completely preserved. And I always, when I come and see this mummy, I say that this person looks to me alive.
The following day, Dr. Hawass invited Rosalie and Winifred to the Cairo Museum, home of over 120,000 Egyptian objects. Coincidentally, the museum was established in 1835, the year of Takabuti's unwrapping in Belfast. Among the mesmerising collection of Egyptian artefacts, Dr. Hawass had prepared a very special showing of a mummy from the 25th dynasty, the era of Takabuti. The 25th dynasty was around 700 years BC, meaning that the symbols and painting of the sarcophagus should have similarities to that of Takabuti's.
This is a mummy of a lady. Her name is Bedit Bastet, Dynasty 25. Is your mummy the same like this?
No, our mummy was wrapped in linen bindings, but they were white. They're cream. White, yeah.
And this is the black
one,
style.
yes.
But you know, Dynasty 25, it has white mummies.
Yes, yes. The painting on the case and the decoration was indeed very similar to Takabuti's. So presumably this was a 25th dynasty style of case painting. And that was a kind of revelation as well.
The sourcing of a mummy from the exact era of Takabuti was of immense importance to building up her profile. Dr. Hawass was to have one last revelation for his guests and a conclusion to the story of the Reverend Edward Hinks.
Here is the bust of our great band, Edward Hinks. You know, I'm really happy to see this bust here in this museum, because always we honor people who make great discoveries in Egypt. Yes. Then I'm really so happy to see the bust of Edward Hinks in the garden of the famous and the great people. And I want to tell you one thing. When I found out that I'm going to meet you, and I did some research on the mummy of Takabuti, first I'm very happy with this name. It's very strange ancient Egyptian named Takabuti. And I found out that he's the one who translated
That's right,
the language in the coffin in your museum.
He did, yes.
That many people doesn't know. I hope that people can look at his face and remember that that great man was the man who gave us the key of the Akkadian language. Can I tell you an idea? Would you like us to make a replica of this bust and send it to you?
It would be wonderful.
Okay,
That'd be a tremendous idea.
It's really, the people in Ireland has to know about this great man. Look at his eyes now. You can feel he's happy that we are going to look at him.
The basic resin head of Takabuti had now returned to Dundee University from Cardiff for the next stages of the reconstruction. The first issue was how to decide on a true representation of Takabuti's skin tones.
All of us, whatever colour our skin, we've all got a base layer of reddy pink underneath from the blood vessels. So that's why we've got this initial pinky skin tone. It's very difficult to know exactly what colour her skin was. So we can assume that because of where she lived, she's not going to have very pale skin. So we're going to give her a kind of mid-toned brown skin. After the skin has been painted, we'll be adding eyelashes and eyebrows and any makeup that she would have worn. We'll be attaching the wig that she will have worn over her real hair, and we'll be adding the final skin texture details such as blemishes and slight inconsistencies that will make her look realistic.
It was recorded that Takabuti's father, Nespar, was a priest at the Temple of Karnak in Luxor. It was a time for more detective work as the experts travelled from Cairo to see for themselves where Takabuti was raised and to get a real sense of her life living within these ancient walls.
Well, it's no wonder they were an important family, because obviously it must have been important to have this kind of doll.
The huge pillars of the Temple of Amun, where Takabuti's father performed religious rituals, housed a spectacular forest of giant papyrus-shaped columns which reached up to the skies in honour of the gods.
Here we are in the hypostyle hall, and this was the way through for the priests into the sanctuary on the other side. And this was supposed to be a great primeval forest growing up from the ground. Wonderful. It's fantastic. All these columns are close together to represent the fertility of Egypt and the land of Egypt. So they're quite special, really. It's a wonderful place.
The temple walls and pillars were covered in artwork depicting the important role of the temple and its ceremonies.
And I'm really struck by this huge illustration of a boat.
Yes.
In which the god is being carried out across the water to show to the people.
Yes.
And you know, in the museum we have this little slate palette which shows you the god Khepri in his form as a scarab beetle being carried in one of these barks.
Yes, yes.
Across.
Yes.
And so it's fascinating. And I think, now you can see, isn't it Horus? You can see.
Yes, they're wearing masks. These are the priests. And maybe Takabuti's father this might have been one of his duties to carry the bark of the god and to be in these processions. Yes. So we can really reconstruct quite a lot of what his daily work would have been.
Yes.
The Nile still plays a huge part in irrigating the deserts of Egypt, and it is remarkable that water was channeled to Luxor to fill the temple's sacred lake. At sunrise each day, priests like Takabuti's father would set free a goose across these waters as a symbol of the great cackler, the goose that laid the cosmic egg at the dawn of creation.
So here we've got the sacred lake of the temple, Winifred, and of course this is where Takabuti's father would have gone to bathe himself every morning before going into the temple, because this purified the priests. So you can almost imagine the scene at the great festival when they brought out the statue and carried it round and sailed it on the lake.
Yes, and would Takabuti and her companions, would they be allowed to watch this? Would they have had to keep back?
They would have seen some of it because the festivals took place outside the temple. It was a way of showing the god to the people.
Yes.
And they took the deities between the Karnak temple and the Luxor temple. And so there would be great processions, as you can see on the temple walls.
Oh, absolutely,
here.
yes.
Yeah.
At the temple precinct of Karnak, there was living accommodation for the priests and their families just outside the temple itself, in the same way as rectories are built nearby our churches.
And the Takabuti and her family would have lived somewhere between the edge of the temple and the perimeter wall there.
The crumbling remains of a once great house lay ahead. This is where Takabuti grew up.
We know that Takabuti was a wealthy lady and the mistress of a great house, and it's always interesting to think about the sort of lifestyle she would have had.
Yes, I mean, she would have had a house full of servants.
Absolutely.
Lots of bedrooms and shower rooms.
Yes.
Some of the scenes in the tomb show these wonderful banquets
where
they were all being entertained and drinking wine.
That's right.
And the food they would have had.
And the food they would have had as well.
Yeah, because the food, of course, was brought from the temple by the priests and divided up amongst their families.
Yes.
So they would have been eating the food the gods had,
yes.
Which was very largely a meat diet, whereas the ordinary people, as you know, were eating the sort of vegetarian diet.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. These were the sights she would have seen every day.
You feel closer in time to them. 25th dynasty doesn't seem so far away. You feel, you know, an immediate connection, I think, with the sort of life she would have led, and the fact that she lived in such close proximity, really, to the great temple, showed you how very much they revered the gods and how their whole everyday life was tied up with the gods as well.
The experts travelled from Luxor across the deserts near the Valley of the Kings to the stunning temple of Hatshepsut. This is where Takabuti's father would have been buried. It was traditional that the priest's family would be laid to rest by his side.
It was, of course, a mortuary temple, which meant that not only was the god worshipped here, but the ruling king or queen in this case had rituals so that they would survive after death as a deity. So she would go on to be a god in the next world.
Queen Hatshepsut died in 1458 BC, leaving behind this legacy. She called her temple the Splendour of Splendours, and it rises up over 300 metres above the desert plain, carved out of the limestone cliffs.
It was designed by a man called Senmut, who was the architect of Queen Hatshepsut, and he obviously had an eye for this wonderful backdrop of the Theban cliffs.
Yes. And the colours fitting so well with each other.
Yes, yeah.
It's really right.
And either side there would be these great gardens with flowering trees and incense. Must have been really lovely.
This is 18th dynasty and Takabuti was 25th dynasty.
Yes.
And so she would have been able to see this in her day.
Yes, yes.
And to be able to come here and attend whatever rituals were happening.
Yes, and then in her death she also would have been near, so would have been a feature in life and in death.
And in death as well.
Yeah.
This is where Takabuti was brought in her funeral procession to pass into the afterlife. Deir el-Bahari may have been the location of Takabuti's grave. However, it was not to be her final resting place. The 1800s saw a virtual invasion of the Valley of the Kings by archaeological treasure hunters. They plundered the graves, searching for buried artefacts, and stole the bodies to be sold at popular mummy markets. It was at one of these markets where Thomas Gregg bought Takabuti in 1834. Her story was to take her from here and across the seas to Belfast, where the Ulster Museum would be her final home.
You know, for me this has been the end of a fantastic journey. I've looked after Takabuti in the museum for over 30 years, and now finally to be able to stand in the place which was her final resting place is really a wonderful thrill and a really great end to her story.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was to be the conclusion of this part of Winifred Glover's relationship with the mummy, after more than 3 decades of caring for her remains. Meanwhile, work continued at Queen's University in trying to piece together the information on the physical data harvested in Manchester.
Eileen, we've got some very exciting results to show you today of the
Dr. Eileen Murphy met with Dr. Paula Reimer from the university's Chronology Centre. Eileen began to summarise the complex information so she could report back to the group. Samples of Takabuti's hair had been taken for radiocarbon dating and isotope analysis. The samples were subjected to a rigorous purification process to remove all contamination. The pure material was then run through an accelerator mass spectrometer to get the radiocarbon date. An isotope radiomass spectrometer obtained the isotope information. These high-tech pieces of equipment caused the ions to accelerate to very high speeds before analysing their masses and separating out the different isotopes. The conclusions were soon to be revealed. A year after they first convened, the team of experts returned to Belfast Castle to reveal their findings.
My work as an archaeologist has largely looked at skeletons, and there's almost a sort of an anonymous feel to them, because while you try to empathise with skeletons, you don't really know the person as an individual. But with Takabuti, it was something different. And for me, she's like an old friend, because she's really one of the big reasons why I became an archaeologist. One of my roles in the project was to bring the samples of Takabuti's hair and bandage back to the Chrono Laboratory in Queen's University, Belfast.
A radiocarbon date isn't a calendar date. Takabuti's radiocarbon age was range cross-referenced with graphs based on known age tree ring measurements.
So she was quite happy to go with the date of about 600 BC. So the other part of the analysis that was undertaken in the Chrono Laboratory was stable isotope analysis for the purposes of looking at Takabuti's diet.
The non-radioactive isotopes of Takabuti's hair provided information on the types of plants and proteins she would have eaten. Takabuti ate little cereal, but food mainly derived from trees, shrubs and legumes, beans, peas and other pod foods. She would have also eaten freshwater fish such as catfish and perch.
Freshwater fish, and this would sort of tie in with what we'd expect for ancient Egyptians, you know, with the Nile being a really rich resource for them. What about Takabuti, the woman herself? Well, whenever she was originally unwrapped in 1835, the doctors concluded, you know, from looking at her teeth, that she wasn't less than 20 or more than 30 when she died. There's a little bit of wear on her teeth, and I think this actually pushes her into sort of like a 25 to 35. Now, for me, this is one of the most sort of intriguing aspects of the imaging. It's definitely not part of Takabuti's internal organs, so it must have been a package that was deliberately placed inside her chest during the mummification process. But we do know that the heart was always given special treatment because it was considered to be the centre of the individual's being, because basically it was needed in the final judgment before Osiris to determine if the person could get into the afterlife. So I wonder, is this package maybe the remnants of her heart?
If this was the heart of Takabuti, then she would indeed have been allowed to enter into the afterlife. John Denton was next to speak to the group.
The other major component of the material we took at endoscopy was wood. And these are wood fibres, wood sawdust in effect, and this is from the packing. And again,
John was to tell the group of his disappointments during his research.
On a personal note, I felt really frustrated in that all of the internal organs had been removed, probably at the time of interment. If we'd have had biological material, internal organs to look at, we may have indeed found the cause of death.
We discovered quite a lot of information about her health, her lack of disease. I mean, we can't identify disease in her, but we can find out that she was a woman between 20 and 30 who died from an unknown cause. The evidence we have about her manicure and her hairstyle shows us that she was indeed, as the inscriptions say, somebody of very high status.
In 1835, 130 men were present at the unwrapping of the mummy. In 2009, 130 school children were chosen to be the first to see the face of Takabuti. They were to promise that, as adults, they would bring a child to the Ulster Museum to show them the mummy. They would tell them of the day they were amongst the first children in the world to see how Takabuti looked in life. And they would ask that child to do the same when they grew up, so that the legacy and the story of the true face of Takabuti would continue.
Well, I'm delighted to be able to reveal to you today the face of a 25th dynasty lady, Takabuti.
She does look sad. Yeah, she does.
Beautifully done.
Yeah, it's beautifully done, isn't it?
When I look at the face of Takabuti, it makes me realise that here is a woman of her time. Here is a woman of character and importance. I really do think we're very privileged to be able to have a representative of such an amazing civilization in Belfast for so long.
This has been a real privilege to work on this particular mummy with colleagues from Belfast, and we've all worked as a team. We walked in the footsteps of Takabuti. We traced her life and her death, and it brought us much closer to this quite amazing individual.
One of the things that impressed me all the way through was the dignity that was brought to the project. Takabuti was treated as if she had passed away literally a few days ago. Everyone looked upon her not as an object of research, but as a person. What we found was that this person, Takabuti, became real to us, even though she was 2,500 years old, and we treated her as such.
Being involved in the facial reconstruction of the face of Takabuti has been a great thrill for us. It means that we can produce a face that's being exhibited in a museum that the people of Northern Ireland will get a great deal out of, both now and in the future.
And so that when we open the museum again, she'll be able to emerge, as it were, in her full splendour, with so much more information about her, so much more interest for the people of Belfast. So that I think, you know, she's got so much more to offer, and will continue to have so much more to offer in the years to come.
It was soon time for the mummy to return to the Ulster Museum to retake her place as one of its most treasured exhibits. Here she would once again remain under the watchful eye of Winifred Glover. And so the story of Takabuti had been told and her true face revealed. And she will continue to be of huge fascination to the generations of children in Northern Ireland and to enthrall visitors from around the world. This is the story of Takabuti, a woman who lived over 2,600 years ago in Egypt, but who now rests in Belfast.
Tomorrow night on BBC HD, we're taking you back for a new term at Waterloo Road. That's at 8. And tonight, stay with us for brand new political satire from Armando Iannucci and The Thick of It.